Thank you so much to everybody for being here today. This is the one of the first events in Startup Week this year, and I am really excited to have this team together for our session talking about the founder mental health crisis today. So thank you so much for being here. I want to just thank, as we're getting started, all the sponsors for Boulder Startup Week. There are some incredible companies. You can see them on the website. There's about 15 different names. Dave, who is one of our panelists here today, his company, Technical Integrity, is one of those sponsors that helps make this entire event happen. So thank you so much to those incredible sponsors. And even though we're doing this virtually this year, there's still a lot of effort that goes on behind the scenes with the track captains and the organizers that honestly start building this event 6 months ago before now, and have been working on it since then to bring us some incredible content. So thank you to all the sponsors. And the health track this year that this event is part of is actually sponsored by a company that I work for. So it's a little weird, but I'm going to read you our paragraph that folks are reading in the other events in this track as well. So thank you to the health track sponsor, Founders First System. Founders First System is a simple framework that helps entrepreneurs stay healthy and happy while they build their companies and change the world. We've been using frameworks to optimize our companies for years. This is the first framework for optimizing founders themselves. Join the conversation by becoming a member of the Founders First community at community.foundersfirstsystem.com or by searching for the Founders First System community app in iOS or Android stores on your phone. So thank you to my team for deciding to sponsor the health track this year. And it's great to be here with everybody. Thank you to everyone online for joining us, and thanks to Kristen and Dave for taking the time to share your experience with us. We're so glad you're here, and Boulder Startup Week is my favorite event of the year, every year in Boulder, as I know it is for so many of you as well. And so we're making it the most incredible event that we can make online over Zoom this year, and I'm sure I'll see lots of you out on the trails and the skin tracks if there's some snow left. So thanks so much for the invitation. The issue of mental health for entrepreneurs is a subject that is so close to my heart. I'm really excited about this conversation. My name is Aaron Houghton. I'll be acting as both our moderator as well as a panelist today. So you'll kind of see me switching back and forth between those two roles, from asking questions and participating alongside our panel and providing some of our thoughts on the questions as well. We'll start with introductions and opening remarks from each of our panelists, and then I'll jump in with some questions. And I'm also going to be looking for your questions in the chat feed in Zoom. So please type in a question anytime it occurs to you, drop it into the chat box in Zoom, and we'll pick those up about 30 minutes in probably. And if we've got a good list of questions, we'll start answering from those instead of the ones that I have from that point on. So please ask questions, jump in, and just generally support our panelists who are here just sharing their personal stories in order to try and help increase the dialogue around founder mental health. I mentioned that self-care and mental health for entrepreneurs is an issue that I'm passionate about, so I want to tell you a little bit about my story. Over the last 20 years, I've started 11 companies, and I started my first company in high school. I went from mowing lawns to starting to write code as a hobby in the late 90s. To starting a software company with 350 employees, which I sold for over $150 million in 2012. And at that point, everything that I thought was success had come to pass. But I worked myself so hard in those years that I really didn't realize the impact that it was having on my health and on my life. Lack of sleep, poor nutrition. I was having panic attacks sitting at my desk at work, trying to figure out what was going on. I thought I was dying. Debilitating anxiety, and I was even diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic cancer in my 20s while running my company. We grew from $15 million to $26 million in revenue that year, and I get a call at my desk telling me that I have cancer. At that point, I'd sold my company, but I didn't sell the struggle. I didn't sell habits. I didn't sell the anxiety. Those were mine forever. And as entrepreneurs, many of us suffer in silence, and that's what I did for years. Then one day after selling my company, I hit my absolute rock bottom. I had a really bad panic attack. I actually thought I was having a heart attack. And it was a moment that I'll never forget. It was at that moment that I had to admit that these patterns were part of me. And it was past time to begin the long, hard road back to being healthy and happy again, which is a place that I had not arrived at just through selling my company. So I started sharing my story with people and my struggles, and I sat back and listened to their experiences. And I just listened a lot. I wanted to hear if other people had a similar experience. Over 5 years, I interviewed a couple hundred entrepreneurs, and what I heard was absolutely incredible. It's really changed my life forever. The story is consistent out there. Entrepreneurs are suffering. And it's not just a problem for us as a society, because it's not just a problem for us as entrepreneurs, but it's also a problem for our entire society, because we're the ones with the new ideas, the groundbreaking technologies, the innovations across every single sector, and we absolutely change the world. We create hundreds of thousands of new businesses and millions of jobs every year. But 72% of entrepreneurs are affected by mental health conditions. That's the large majority. I mean, it's kind of crazy when you think about it, that this is like the consistent experience for us as founders. 49% of entrepreneurs report having lifetime mental health conditions. And get ready for this. This is my favorite stat because it's the craziest. Entrepreneurs are 11 times more likely to be bipolar than the average population. 11 times. This leaves us as entrepreneurs incredibly and particularly vulnerable to the stress and pressure and uncertainty that we endure doing what we do every day. But most of us suffer in silence. So I had to do something and make this journey easier for all of my entrepreneur friends, because my belief is it doesn't have to be this way. So I've taken everything I learned from my own journey and journey of hundreds of other founders, and I turned it into the system I've created that I call the Founders First system. It's my own therapy as I'm trying to solve the bad habits that got me into a place that I didn't want to end up as an entrepreneur. And Founders First system is a set of tools that entrepreneurs use to strengthen themselves. So instead of burning out as they build their businesses, they're prepared for a lifetime of improved health, better quality of life, and hopefully more success in business as well. And we actually just launched in April. And so I've been leading a workshop with entrepreneurs where I ask, what are you willing to give up to be successful in building your business? It's one of my favorite questions to ask because it's the question that I wish somebody would have asked me 20 years ago when I was starting my first company. So are you willing to give up your relationship with your loved ones, your health, years off the end of your life? These things are really at stake. If we just grind and push ourselves to the breaking point, the data says that that is what we will end up giving up. The fact that these principles are now getting attention, and the fact that here at Boulder, Boulder Startup Week has been leading conversations like this for the last several years, is a sign that we're at an inflection point, a real cultural shift that I'm excited about. And it's one that I think we really need to embrace as entrepreneurs. If we empower entrepreneurs, they can succeed in building their businesses and survive the process. And that's what we want all entrepreneurs to do, because we need your brilliance from building companies time and time again. So thanks again for asking me to be here. I'm excited about this conversation and just happy to share with all of you and happy to help however I can. I'd like to introduce our first panelist today, and her name is Kristen Darga. And Kristen's the CEO, author. She's an author, a speaker, an executive coach, and the founder of Black Label Coaching and Impact Founder, where she tells the real gritty and unsexy stories of entrepreneurship and fine-tunes the minds of global leaders and entrepreneurs. She's told hundreds of confessional founder stories and deciphered the cause of loneliness and suffering among business owners. Her media company and her award-winning book, Impact Founder, provide an outlet for entrepreneurs to share their hardships and their triumphs. She's a contagious creative and visionary leader determined to activate people's dreams so she can help them have a kick-ass life. So let's give a warm welcome to Kristen. Kristen, thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's really fun to see the pictures behind your introductions. I'm glad we did that.
Yeah, will you tell us about that for a second?
About what the pictures, absolutely.
Yeah, why we all have pictures there.
Yeah, so Impact Founder is a media company. We share stories of what it's really like to have a business, and we do it in a specific way. So what you see is this picture with a quote, and that's pretty much become our brand since the very, very first days in the early exhibit. And we do it to normalize the fact that successes and challenges exist sort of on the same plane. You'll notice in mine here and all of the pictures that we have that we use connecting words like and we do that on purpose. It sounds a little weird sometimes. We want to say but or however, although we actually use and because using a different statement like but or however or although negates the first part of the sentence. So in this case, launching 6 weeks after the concept, it was a really fast launch. It came together really, really easily. And if I said but there, but I was scared, then all of a sudden all you're focused on is being scared. That's all you're focused on. So we use the word and so that we create like an even playing field. We don't dismiss the first part whether it's a success or a challenge. So that's about the pictures.
So
I
glad
can
we
tell
have
you
it.
more about the company in a second.
Yeah, that's great. Kristen, do you want to share your introduction?
Yeah, you mean the story, my
Yeah.
own story?
Yeah, that'd be great.
I may need you to prompt me a little bit just because you're in the driver's seat. So
You got it.
I'll follow your prompts.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, so my own story, I guess about why mental health and entrepreneurship is an important topic for me personally is there's a couple of reasons. This is my fifth company. I lost track after some point, 5. And I mean, the first company I had, I remember it was, I lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and there was a time where I found myself home a lot. It was the very first time I was home, secluded in my own apartment, working alone, which I think everyone now can really identify with that, especially wherever you are right now in this exact moment, you're dealing with this. I found myself feeling really isolated, and I ended up, this is a story I don't tell very often, and this is a very, very personal one, is for me, I noticed that it was my early 20s, and I would find myself drinking a bottle of wine almost every night. And I woke up the next day and I was unmotivated. I was grumpy as heck, and it just kind of kept perpetuating. And I made a rule for myself. I think I'm lucky in that I caught it and I didn't like it and didn't want to continue doing that. And I made a rule for myself not to drink alone at home. And it wasn't really the drinking that was the problem. It was really just the loneliness, the thoughts, the trying to not go out and spend money, all those little things for entrepreneurship. Fast forward, 10 or so years. And I was, in 2014, dating a man whose business was doing really well. And that actually was a problem for him. He couldn't scale to keep up with his growth. He felt underneath it all. He felt really like he couldn't provide what he promised. And for him, that ended up being compounded by whatever else he had going on in his life. And he almost took his life because his business was doing well, which is shocking. We always think about how we would feel, amazing, like we're on top of the world. But even when we think people are on top of the world, there's still, our mind plays tricks on us. He just felt like he was underneath everything that he had to deal with. In 2015, there were 3 deaths of founders under the age of 32. 2 died by suicide and 1 died in his sleep. That just, at that time I was a coach and I was working with entrepreneurs, and I thought, like, there's something bigger here that I can do. So I launched Impact Founder, and I did it to address that loneliness, that stress, that isolation, that what I found, high percentage of entrepreneurs who experience depression and what we could call self-reported mental health concerns. And Impact Founder does exactly that through, we don't specifically say it's mental health, but we do it to normalize the human experience, if you will. And so that would be my story of why it's important, from my own personal experience off to, experience of others that I was really close with.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Kristen. Yeah, this is what we're asking in this panel today, and I'm just so impressed with folks for being this brave to show up and tell these stories, is to really share these personal stories that didn't always feel great in the moment, and what we've learned from them. So that's really incredible. I'm excited to introduce our second panelist, Dave Mayer. Dave Mayer is the founder of Technical Integrity. Technical Integrity's core mission is to build community, help great companies and candidates thrive, and be a conduit to a better world. He's also a serial startup founder and one of the first people to speak publicly about the challenges of mental health among entrepreneurs. His 2018 Boulder Startup Week panel with Brad Feld about founder mental health is legendary in this community, and I know many of you got the opportunity to see it back then. It's absolutely incredible, the things that team got together and shared on stage. And so just so proud of everyone for starting to share these stories. That conversation really broke open the doors on the conversation we're having here today. And so let's give a warm welcome to Dave. Dave, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, everybody. Good to see some familiar faces here. Happy Boulder Startup Week. It is also my favorite week of the year. I'm sorry it is being done at a distance, but obviously for all the right reasons. And thanks to Rundle and Adam Mayer, brother from another mother, and of course, Andrew Hyde and all those folks at Glider who made this possible. And thanks to all the sponsors. So thank you. Yeah, so this is our 10th year sponsoring Boulder Startup Week, so certainly grateful to be part of this community. You know, we've long been passionate community builders, and you know, my day job these days is building healthy, resilient, diverse, and profitable executive and engineering teams. I've been doing that for 20 years, 10 years on my own with, or as the founder of Technical Integrity, I should say. Yep, serial entrepreneur. You know, my story, I think before I jump into my story, a couple things I wanted to say. We did a panel on Friday with a couple disclaimers up front. And I think, you know, please, if anybody in this audience is immediately at risk, please call 911. We also will, maybe Aaron or Kristen, you can put up the crisis hotline in the chat. I think that's really important. You know, and these are just sort of our experience shares. You know, this is just sort of how we dealt with our personal situations. Obviously, Kristen is a professional. I'm a professional in a different field, but definitely not a psychological professional. Just here to share with how I dealt with some of my crises and continue to deal with them. So, but if you are in a crisis of your own right now, please ask for help and know that it's okay to ask for help. So jumping into my specific story, I had always wanted to be a tech startup founder, you know, had fallen in love with the Boulder startup community in sort of 06, 07, and just the vibrancy of it and the collaborative nature of it. And, you know, sitting in the back of what many of you know as the old school Boulder Denver New Tech meetup that met at the law library on Boulder campus. You know, many times it was standing room only, and it was, you know, the energy in that place, even through the recession, was palpable and just amazing, and people were so welcoming. You know, but I always wanted to contribute. I just wasn't quite sure how. You know, but finally listening to Brad Feld and David Cohen, who've become friends at this point, both mentors and friends, you know, listening to them talk about this, the give first ethos and what it meant to be, to give to the startup community, give of yourself, give of your time, of your resources, of your knowledge, your expertise, with no expectation of anything in return. That's when the light went on for me, you know, both from a recruiting perspective, that we could really differentiate and show the engineering community that we were genuine in our approach by just, you know, spending thousands and thousands of hours, you know, putting on startup weekends and Ignite Boulders. And, you know, again, this is the 10th year of being either an organizer or sponsor of Boulder Startup Week, same thing with Denver Startup Week, but it was passionate activity for us. And so we gave and we gave, and you know, we certainly, there are stories, and we can get into this later, about people who give too much sort of at their own risk. And I know there's people who fit into that category on this call, but it's been a successful formula for us to give to the community, to help others. And so specifically in 2010, when I started Technical Integrity, I also had the bright idea to start a tech startup that was going great for a period of a year, but as the slide here says, you know, I was working 2 full-time jobs, you know, too many 80-hour weeks. Eventually had a falling out with the founder of the tech startup. That wasn't pretty and didn't get prettier. And didn't really know how to ask for help, and really just burned out and ended up in the hospital from exhaustion. You know, had massive anxiety attacks. You know, my wife was thankfully by my side, but, you know, had to talk me off the cliff a number of times. But I was, you know, later, and again, we can get into this, but later I was grateful to be part of Entrepreneurs Organization, or EO. And I see some fellow EO members here. Good to see them. And they've heard a lot of my stories about how, you know, I didn't want to see my co-founder in public, and couldn't really deal with the idea of that, and you know, was ashamed to share that I burned out, and you know, ultimately ended up leaving the tech startup. You know, it survived for a good solid 10, 11 years. And we were proud of, you know, some of what we accomplished. I think we ended up raising $800,000 for charities and nonprofits. But I wasn't well. And so from there, I just sort of swore never again, you know, never another 80-hour work week. You know, I saw that there were a lot of other entrepreneurs going through similar things. And that's when in 2014, I asked Brad and Tom Higley and some others to join me on stage and just sort of talk openly about our struggles, so we could help others. And even if it was one other that we helped, that would be meaningful. And one of the people, Kevin Owaki, that many of you know, who helped organize that particular event, and you know, Kristen was there as well. His brother committed suicide, and that's why he was passionate about helping us. So, you know, our goal really became, you know, making sure that never happened again for another entrepreneur. And I'm grateful to say that, you know, that 2014 video has made a lot of difference for a lot of people. And, you know, we just recorded another one for KPMG on Friday, and then this one. And so, you know, for me, I'm just sort of a passionate entrepreneur, community builder who just wants to help. And, you know, thankfully it's been effective.
Thanks, Dave. That's an incredible story. And you've been such a part of this community for such a long time. I think I got the year wrong on the panel. You're correcting me. It's 2014. So a very long time you've been leading this conversation. So thank you for that.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Great. So to Dave and Kristen, I'll kick us off with questions. So to me, one of the biggest struggles for entrepreneurs, especially those of us just starting out, is that the experience is a lot different than what we might have thought it was beforehand, or what the world might have told us an entrepreneur does and feels like. So what do most people think of when they hear the word entrepreneur, and what did you expect when you first got started, and what's been different as you've been in this game for so long?
Do we have a pecking order? Oh, me first. So that's funny, because I think when I first got started in entrepreneurship, I was in my 20s. So I think, you know, you think it's cool and easy and sexy and fun. And I think that's maybe the concept of entrepreneurship. And then, you know, it wasn't as public. And I think now, you know, with social media and, you know, technology, it's really gotten a very different name than, you know, business ownership when I was in my 20s. So now I'm dating myself. But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of how it started to me. And I think, you know, many people believe that. Second part of the question was?
Yeah, like what was different about it once you got into it? You started experiencing it yourself, right? Like what were your first moments of like, oh my God, this isn't as offered, as billed when I signed up for this?
You know, for me, it was really, it's harder to go to an office every day than it is to navigate the struggles that I experienced at that time. You know, I never really felt like I fit into an office. I never felt like my creative spark came alive, or whatever I wanted to do was always, you know, dampened. So in one way I was like thriving and excited, and I got to do like all these fun creative things. And then the other side, it was, I don't have enough money to go places, and I'm drinking wine at home, and I alone every night. And I think, you know, that was a tough balance. It was, here I am doing what I absolutely positively feel like is my thing to do. And then the other part of it was, but I don't know how to socialize the same way anymore. I miss community. And though that was what kind of changed it for me, if it was changed. You know, after my first company, I spent, you know, I think the next 5 years with 5 to 7 years at a company. Like, I was an employee. And then when that ended, I was like, all right, I'm back at it again. And it really felt like it was home, regardless of what I was dealing with. Still does.
I'll steal the moderator hat for a second. Aaron, what about you? I mean, you've had some big wins, but when you got started, what what were you thinking about? You weren't thinking about selling, maybe you were, but my guess is you didn't perhaps realize you could sell a business for 150 million. But then what were the sort of real day-to-day realities of that, besides the quote unquote cash out, right?
Yeah, in the beginning it was all fun and games, right? It was all dreams and rainbows and puppies and kittens, and every day was a lot of fun. Admittedly, looking back on it, like my favorite, happiest times are definitely in the first 1 to 3 years. My story was a little bit weird in that we were, we wanted to be a high growth software company, but we didn't start with the investor side. I was a software developer and my business partner was good at marketing and sales. And so I built something, he started selling it to people. And a couple years in, so let's see, maybe 4 years in, we bootstrapped it to a couple $1 million in revenue. And we were growing quickly, but we thought maybe we could grow a little faster. And a friend of ours in North Carolina at the time had raised a bunch of capital and said, man, you guys are growing quickly. Like you could actually raise money really easily right now. And I think I was, what was I, 24 years old, and my business partner was 21. And, this is in the early 2000s. And we're like, no one would give anybody as young as us money. And we went out and started having some conversations, and investors gave us money. And then now we were playing with someone else's money. So to me, that was kind of the first level where everything ratcheted up. It didn't, we still owned a majority of the company, and my co-founder and I had control of the board, but it didn't feel exactly like our company anymore. And we had a couple $1 million of somebody else's money at stake. And, what the investors wanted us to do, and the reason why we took their money, we wanted to do it too, was to grow faster. And as things picked up, we had to learn faster, and we just fell behind faster as two first-time founders trying to figure out where to take it. And then in our later years, the story really goes, competitors just flooded into our market and became really well funded in 2009 and 2010 as the economy recovered. All our competitors got funded, and they honestly started kicking our butt. And so now we're scared from the standpoint of we've built something great, we have these outside expectations, and we don't exactly have the answers anymore. And I struggled greatly through that time with imposter syndrome, feeling like, how did I get here and why am I the person that owns such a big chunk of this company? And I was chairing the board of directors at the time with a bunch of, really smart people with a ton of money wearing suits flying down from the Northeast to our board meetings. And I looked around and I was like, these people all at least look qualified to run this company. I do not. I don't feel qualified. I don't know where we're going next. And it was scary.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was all sort of rainbows and kittens as a perception, as you say, initially, like you have that dream of the big win, right? And we all have likely friends in the community who have had big wins. Of course, they're the stats on those are not great, right? I think we all know 95% of startups fold, and likely far more than that in the time of COVID. I think the reality for me became, we started taking retainers for our high profile searches, and my father, as an Air Force captain, told me very early, and as a kid, was the only thing you really own in your life is your integrity. And that was part of the reason we called the business technical integrity. But along with taking significant retainers came a tremendous amount of responsibility and stress. Even if we're successful, and I've been doing this for 20 years, and I have all the tools and I have all the knowledge. I have sort of been there, done that with regards to shit going sideways, but I still have a tremendous amount of anxiety and stress around, what if, right? And maybe it's the Jewish grandmother that's been implanted in me, from my Jewish grandmother, right? It's all that what ifs, right? And what if I don't do something right, So it's I think we're always our own worst enemy, right? We're always our own worst critics. But for me, sort of propelling the conversation forward a little bit, is what has been powerful for me is to surround myself with like-minded, smart people like everybody on this call, right? And entrepreneurs who go through these same machinations of hiring and firing and raising money and losing money, especially somebody else's money. God forbid, right? Obviously, the dream, of course, is to kick ass, but that's not always the case. And then, you know, it's also to be authentic and vulnerable, as we're doing here today, in your approach, and understand that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be stressed. It's okay to understand the difference between eustress and distress. And it's okay to ask for help, right? And so, I mean, that's where it's become really powerful to be able to give myself permission and ask for help and surround myself with people like everybody on the call here. So I can shut up and let anybody else expand on that.
Yeah, great sharing, Dave. Yeah, there's I think one of the things that I hear a lot from people is this kind of challenge back around, like, yeah, we all know that stress has some downsides, but, you know, are there upsides to stress as well? That's a question that I've gotten asked a lot recently, right? Like, you know, don't hate on stress. All stress isn't bad. I finally found a model for this recently in a Harvard Business Review study. It's called the Yerkes-Dodson law, and they looked at performance of people under different levels of stress on a scale from 0 to 40. And they found that 13 out of 40, so about 25% activation, maybe a little more than that, about 30% stress. I guess this was people's own scale from 0 to 40 of like crazy stress to 0. But 13 out of 40 was optimal, right? So there is some proof that, you know, 0 stress maybe isn't enough to actually get us fired up to want to go do something. But when people say, you know, maybe stress is the tool that actually helps me get things done, at least the scientific model tells us, yes, to the point of about 13 out of 40, and anything above that, productivity starts to drop off. So you're not gaining anything by ratcheting it up any higher than that. I want to, you know, anyone out there that has questions, go ahead and start dropping them in the chat. I'm going to ask one more question here, and then I'll check back in with the chat thread again. So please ask away. No wrong questions. Back to Dave and Kristen, I want to think about the entrepreneurial personality type. Maybe I'll start with Kristen on this, because you work with so many founders that you coach. So you've seen this across the board, not just in yourself as a founder, but in so many other people. I think the rest of us, we see this across our networks. My network is highly composed of entrepreneurs. So this entrepreneurial personality type, are there strengths and weaknesses that you've consistently seen that show up in founders?
I think it's important to define entrepreneur, founder, and business owner. Right? So there's different reasons why people start companies. So if we're specifically talking about entrepreneurs, that would be different than necessarily someone who's owning a business, maybe more creative, people who actually thrive in circumstances like the world right now in some ways. You know, I think you're looking at, I always say when you're trying to pigeonhole like what kind of person does this, you're missing the point. You know, the reasons behind why people would have a company are I would look for commonalities there. Yeah. Creativity, curiosity, not fitting in the system, F that boss who fired me. I mean, these are all the reasons why people start companies. So I tend to not classify people as typical entrepreneur. And then there are characteristics that lead toward, you know, people wanting to be an entrepreneur. That would be a creative person who loves problem solving, who thinks outside the box, someone who thrives in really difficult situations, somebody who sees the opportunity right now when things are absolutely imploding and a lot of people are shrinking into security and safety. A lot of times that CEO and that the entrepreneurial CEO, the founder is looking at like, okay, great, here we are, we're doing this one thing. How can we pivot? What's necessary right now in the industry that we're in, or how can we serve our clients better with the tools that we have and let them know that we can help serve them? It's not marketing, it's more that creative problem solving. So I think that would be something that would lead toward someone wanting to start a company, someone who's risk adverse. And there are plenty of founders who are not risk adverse. So I tend to not like to pigeonhole. I've worked with so many different founders, and some are incredibly risk adverse and they don't want to take any chances, but they really don't want a job. So, I mean, but I would say that a lot of founders right now are looking at the opportunities. A lot of people in my network, a lot of my friends, they're the kind of person, they're all entrepreneurs, and they're looking at, okay, what's the opportunity right now? What's the need that's out there? What's our company doing to provide that to others? And then people don't know about that. How can we market that? And that's, I would say, more entrepreneurial.
Yeah, thank you. We've got a bunch of great questions here. So one of these I actually want to point to Dave. So great question from Andrew in the audience here. How forthright should we be with our teams and our shareholders regarding our mental state? Dave, do you have a take on that? It's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important one, and I saw that one pop up, and I do have I think that falls into the sort of authentic and vulnerable approach. I think my best answer is actually surrounding a real world example from around the last recession, where a CEO was going out and trying to raise money. It was rah, we're going to get all this money, we're going to be successful, and then found out the hard way that the economy was contracting, and it was much harder to come by money, and for good reason. And then she just went into her office and just didn't say anything, didn't know how to deal with it, didn't want to come back and disappoint anybody, and she was embarrassed, and didn't really know how to handle it. But after some reflection, after sitting down with her board, really being forthright and being willing to be vulnerable and authentic with the board and with the leadership, came back and then said, okay, team, plan A didn't work. And we as a team need to come up with plan B. Obviously there's sort of appropriate approaches for, small business, seed funded business, Series A funded business versus, public company, and sort of appropriate answers for who and when you involve. But the answer is always a measure of humbleness and candor, and it's not cockiness, it's not holding stuff in, it's not withholding information or withholding secrets. That's not how you're going to get to success. It's certainly going to be uncomfortable. And that Radical Candor book is probably powerful for the person who asked this question. But at the end of the day, the truth will set you free.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that as well. And one of the teams that came through my workshop recently was a team of 3 co-founders. And they'd started to optimize at the co-founder level, which I thought was really interesting, that maybe that to them was kind of the safest way to do that. And their definition of kind of taking care of their health and performance was that among the 3 of them, one of them always needed to be in a good place. And it was totally okay if the other 2 weren't. And that's literally what their optimization was for the company. And I don't know how far outside of that team that language went, if that went to their investors or if that went to their whole team underneath them. But I love that, starting kind of at that safe place. I don't know. I didn't share this stuff with my co-founders. So actually, I shouldn't call it safe, but maybe it's a little less risky than some other folks on the outside, right? Down your teams, across partnerships, up to investors and boards and things like that. I thought that was a really incredible definition. I think that ultimately where I want us to get, and I realize this isn't easy to get there, is that we're all thinking about how to optimize the health and performance of the founder. There's data that supports that we have bigger business outcomes when we're healthy as founders, which is good for us. It's also good for our investors. It's good for other people involved. And so, this isn't really just our fight. When you look at the math and the stats around it, this should be everybody's fight. And I envision this world where our investors, might ask that before the board meeting, right? Rate yourself on these couple of factors, and we're going to rate ourselves on these factors, and give vulnerability to the fact that openness to the fact that we might not be in a great position either. We might be sweating about somebody else in our portfolio that's about to go under, and I've spent the last 3 nights not sleeping, worried about it. Now I'm walking into your board meeting, so just so you know, here's how I feel in that moment. I think if we all know that about each other, it's going to be incredible. And I think maybe the next step is compassion, right? We then have to be compassionate to folks that are not in a perfect place. to Dave's comment earlier, it's okay to not be okay, and we've got to be realistic about this is part of the experience. This is just the experience, right? Like there's no shame in feeling these things.
Yep, and I'll just tag on to that briefly. Just I see a therapist. I have for years. I think it's important that managers admit to that. Even again, like you said, I love the idea of, hey, just got off the phone with my therapist, walking into a meeting. I feel so much better now, right? It's just giving them permission to understand, to reduce that stigma overall, but also asking them for permission and showing them that it's okay to ask for help. And so, we'll get there one day, but I think it's important to give that permission among your teams.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Actually, I have two companies. I only talked about Impact Founder, but Black Label Coaching, I actually work with larger companies. Typically they have to be able to afford us. There's actually one question in here from, I think it was Paul Collins, and it ties into what Dave said. So I just want to kind of bring it around, but I work with different size companies, from single founders up to a couple hundred to 500 people. Excuse me. I've actually been sick, so that happens sometimes. Yes, I had the Rona. So basically, I work with a company right now that's really interesting. They encourage their teams work with me, and they encourage their team members to talk to therapists. I encourage people to engage with the therapist also. Obviously, there's a limit. There's a threshold that when I'm working with a client, if it's out of my scope of expertise, I refer clients to therapists, and they're complementary of each other. So, it's that this company that I'm working with is so open about, the mental wellness. And as I think Paul Collins wrote, that the enterprise's responsibility to their employees' mental health and wellness. In this particular instance, they take responsibility in that they create the opportunity for individuals to access a coach and or engage with a therapist. And health insurance obviously helps with that in the larger companies. I know in the smaller companies it can be really tough to access resources when your finances are limited, when you don't have a lot of money to throw to that. My answer to that question is, with Impact Founder, we actually have pretty low priced coaching. And the reason being is, entrepreneurs don't always have, and or teams don't always have access to that higher price point. And we do it through subscription. That wasn't necessarily a plug. That's just one thing that's there. There's obviously resources out there for companies to focus on mental health and wellness. There's some really great options out there. If you're not a company that offers health insurance, there's direct-to-provider care. Peak Med is a really great opportunity. They're not necessarily focused in Boulder, but they're in the Denver, Colorado Springs area, and their direct-to-provider care offers, they have mental health care, they have, medical care. So I guess my answer to Paul's question is, sometimes when we're looking for the solution to employees' mental health and wellness, I think it is partially our responsibility. And it's not just mental health, right? It's all the different aspects, whether it's fitness, therapy, coaches, medical care, all that stuff adds or takes away from, employee or founder mental health. I would say it's how can we be creative in what's out there? Dave just posted something as a great resource. There is something out there that would be supportive to that. So if you have questions on it, all of us probably have resources. Dave just shared one. Again, one of the local health insurance, it's not health, direct-to-provider care offers mental health, and it's just packaged in. There's no extra fees. So I just think it's just as creative as you are with your company. You can be that creative with your founders for their mental wellness. We really focus on that. So I felt compelled to answer that question. And it was a great segue from Dave's discussion about, seeing a therapist.
Yeah. Will you just add your link in there so everybody can see it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I got away from the chat because I was starting to read it.
Yep. Okay. And I'll say I just got off the phone with somebody that was impacted by a layoff. And this is, I suppose, directed towards employers who may have to do some layoffs. I thought this was a great move on their part, that even though this individual had not even been with the organization for, I think, more than 45 days, they actually, for all the 40 some people they laid off, they actually continued their health care through the end of the year. And I thought that was a really smart move, because part of the offering they have is on mental health side of things. So I thought that was pretty awesome. And then, yes, one of the things I've been working on separately is this Energize Colorado, and there is a significant effort around mental health services in Colorado. So definitely check out that link I posted, energizecolorado.com, and then the mental health panel that we did with KPMG from last week will be posted up there soon enough.
Nice. This is a great collection of things coming together. I'm going to see if some of these resources we're sharing here, if I can get them posted in the Boulder Startup Week event after the fact, because that's where this recording will go for people to be able to grab them there easily. And I just want to echo everyone else's support of the concept of having a therapist. Someone described it to me a couple years ago as, a critical part of the entrepreneurial team to helping you be successful, and reframed it as the concept of having an emotional coach. You have a coach for your execution, you have coaches for other things in your life. If you're working on fitness, you hire a personal trainer. Our minds and our emotions are incredible parts of the assets that we use to change the world as entrepreneurs. Very few of us create our economic output by how much we can lift or how much pain we can endure anymore. In the physical world, this is all a mental Olympics that we work in. And so making sure that our minds are tuned to the best of our ability, or even just in a better place than they were yesterday. I know for me, it's been a long journey back towards health again, and I had to just celebrate the little wins along the way. And sometimes that's what we have. I actually so we've got about 5 minutes left. I just want to share that I actually met my therapist here in Boulder at Boulder Startup Week 2 years ago. She was on a panel about Imposter Syndrome that I went to at Galvanize. And I thought her story was so incredible that we connected afterwards, and I've worked with her for 2 years now, which has been an incredible relationship. So my recommendation as well, to have a therapist as part of your team for you, maybe even other team members on your team as well. But I think that question of imposter syndrome is really interesting, and it comes up a lot. That's what attracted me into that session at Startup Week a couple of years ago. Dave, any thoughts on, like, how do we, someone asked in the questions about my story, like, how do we get over imposter syndrome? Does it go away, or do we just get used to it?
It's tough because, to some degree, you do have to fake it till you make it. If you're sort of grinding in a new startup and you're not a subject matter expert, but you're going to become one pretty quickly if you're sort of entirely immersed in it all day, every day, right? That said, no bullshitting, no lying, right? It's telling the truth. But unfortunately, I don't know that the imposter syndrome is going to go away. I don't have a fantastic answer to that, other than, being transparent with people about where you're coming from. I think helping them understand also why you're passionate about this and why you're dedicated to whatever this is, right? This thing you're working on. I think that's a big part of it, right? You can overcome some of your weaknesses through passion and enthusiasm for something. And people want to see, they want to believe in you. They want to give you the benefit of the doubt, right? But obviously there's a big difference between lying and misrepresenting and just, the opposite of that, right? So, maybe there's a happy medium there. I certainly welcome Aaron and Kristen, your thoughts as well.
Yeah, Kristen?
I was busy typing an answer with those resources, so you can ask me the question again.
All right, thanks.
It's imposter syndrome. Your thoughts on it? Is it real? And how do you overcome it?
I can't multitask anymore. COVID has completely changed that.
All good.
Okay, go ahead. What was the question?
Imposter syndrome, real, not real? How do you overcome it?
I don't really have that story about myself. When it has come up, that I mean, I think imposter syndrome is like your own feelings about yourself. My feeling about myself is that I won't be able to do it, even though I am doing it. um, it's not that everyone. It's a different. It's like a different context for me. When it has come up for me, I would say it's in that because I've started a company that's about being vulnerable, about sharing what it's really like to the journey of being a founder, having a couple companies. I find that I don't share unless I have it figured out, because it's as if then it looks like, oh, she shouldn't have this company. She doesn't have it all figured out. That's more of, when it comes up for me, that's what it's like. And that's probably the main thought that I would have that's similar to that. Otherwise, it's more like people don't believe that I'm capable of, because I've dealt with my own ability to be good enough to show up like I say I can, and like I know I can.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great close to final thought here. So thank you, Kristen. What I want to do is, we're just finishing up here, is if everybody could go to chat and just share across the whole audience, like one takeaway that you got from this panel. And Kristen, Dave, and I will do the same thing. So it could just be like a sentence or a thought, and let's start dropping them in. And one of my favorite things to do after these is just see what people took away from it. I am not alone. That's a good one. The first one in. Let's see here.
You beat me to it, Aaron.
Aaron Clark on that one. Thank you, Aaron. Taking care of myself is vital to all of our success. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. It's not just us, it's part of the team. Being a whole person, that's a great one. Yeah. I'll share one last thought. Somebody had asked about my personal story and how I overcame imposter syndrome. I think, I don't know if I can say that I overcame it. I endured it. When competition started coming in and making it really hard on us, all of our metrics in our business, customer acquisition cost was climbing quickly from where it had been steady for years, and customer lifetime value was dropping as churn was increasing. And that was the competitive pressure, because competitors were coming in cheaper or had better marketing than us. We sold the business, and luckily we had a good exit. But I'll tell you that it was in the midst of all of that strife that the offer came in, and probably part of why we decided it was the right time to transition the business to somebody else, because we didn't have all the answers and we were starting to kind of prove to ourselves. So in some ways, I think, maybe I started to agree with that story in my head that I shouldn't be the one running this business, and it was time for somebody else to do it. And that could be done through bringing in another CEO to run the business, or selling the business to somebody else. There's multiple ways that we can do it. And one of the things I like to share that I feel like in my own analysis after my exit that I did wrong for so many years was letting my identity narrow down to just being the entrepreneur. Like, there was very little to my life other than that. My wife drew a pencil sketch on a piece of paper of her experience with me through those 10 years. And it's literally the top of a laptop with just my nose up over the screen. That's her memory of me for that decade of our lives together. And so that part of my identity being underserved as her partner, as well as just all the activities in my life that I used to do before outdoors and with friends. I lost so many of these things. I became just the entrepreneur. So at that point, everything was on the line. If my business failed, 98% of my identity would be destroyed. And it felt so risky. And so the opposite of that is to come up with what all of my identities are and all the things that I hold sacred, and figure out how to commit more time and balance in some degree, maybe not 50-50, but balance in some degree, ways to serve those identities as well. Any final thoughts from the panelists? 30 seconds each.
These questions in the chat are amazing. We could keep going for another hour. So you guys
Yeah, I
really
mean, those will be available later. Yeah, I mean, for me, I think balance is the right word, and connectedness. It's knowing that you do your best each and every day, even if that means you're working 5 hours a day or 10 hours a day. That you're doing quality work, that you give yourself permission to go for a walk, give yourself permission and insist that you spend time with your loved ones. And that includes, animals and friends, and, make time for that. Don't make an excuse that, they'll be there later, because maybe they won't. I just lost my father last year, and would like to have spent more time with him. Right. So life is short. And so know that you're doing your best, and you don't need to work 80-hour weeks to change the world. And chances are work is still going to be there tomorrow. So take a couple deep breaths, go for a walk, do some writing, be okay with work not being done tonight, and everything will be all right.
That's awesome. Thanks, Dave. Kristen,
okay. It's hard to follow that one.
Top that, yeah.
I was gonna say, honestly, allow yourself to have some fun. I mean, why aren't we talking about more fun? Honestly, it's a very serious conversation, and I'm all about that. I can have those serious conversations all day long, and they're important to have, but go have some fun. Enjoy building your company. If you don't enjoy building your company, whatever point that is, someone asked a question about when they should have asked for help. That's the time. When you realize you're not having fun anymore, you're not inspired to do it, that's a time to kind of move away or refocus. But just have fun, enjoy it. It's an honor to be able to build and be creative that way.
Love that. That is a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Kristen, to Kristen Darga and to Dave Mayer. Thank you to everybody for being here. This was a great session. This will be recorded if you want to share it with friends, some of these takeaways. I'm going to see if I can figure out a way to save this chat thread and include some of these takeaways in on the website profile for the event. So if you share it with others, they can see what other people learned from the event as well. So mental health is so important to us all as entrepreneurs. Thank you all for being here. Enjoy Boulder Startup Week.